things are moving.
Sorry.
Please do feel free to put those in the chat, and Vita will be there to help out too if there's any questions that are going forward. So let's dive in. Welcome to our Ethical Digital Showcase that's about the consequences of misinformation. And this, as I was saying at the beginning, is a really interesting topic. And it's one of those ones we're all hearing about it. We're all hearing about fake news a lot. But as I got into it, I was like, this is actually a really big deal. So I'm glad that you're here. You can take a look at some of the consequences and some of the things that we can be doing to prevent this going forward. Before we dive in, though, I'd just like to mention that Ethical Digital's office is based in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route for the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have lived on and cared for these lands for centuries and whose presence continues to enrich our community. So thank you very much for that. And it always is a good thing to actually sit and reflect on what that means. It's not just words. Before we begin, too, there are some guidelines for this webinar. So feel free to leave your microphones muted. Also feel free to leave your cameras off. I know a lot of you are on lunch hour, so this is just your time to chill, eat your sandwich. There will be time for questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to write your questions in the chat box during the presentation, and we can try to answer some of those as we go as well. And Vita will be kind of letting me know when those come up. Also, if you need any extra support, you can please feel free to turn on your transcriptions or anything that you want to do to make this experience more comfortable. And here at Ethical Digital, we prioritize a safe and inclusive environment for these webinars. So we understand that in the ever-changing digital landscape, it means there's always a possibility of a cybersecurity risk. And so if somebody was just to pop in or there's a Zoom incident and anything like that happening, if in that unlikely event, we will just shut down the call and we'll email everybody else after that. So just so everybody knows that that's going to be the plan if anything was to go sideways. But your safety, comfort, engagement, excitement about this topic are at the core of our webinar experience, so let's get to it. So while we're waiting for a few of the extras to join us, I'd like to begin by sharing a little bit about myself and Ethical Digital, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into the content. So it just also helps to understand where we're coming from when we're sharing this information with you. So at Ethical Digital, we have the teeny tiny goal of changing the trajectory of the internet. So basically, we want to make sure that whatever's going on in the internet and all these different evolutions of things are actually good for human beings. We just think this is a really important component of some of the development that's going on out there. So we do this through our inclusive digital marketing services. So we do social media for folks, websites, email strategies, ads, all sorts of things. We also partner with other marketing firms all the time. So if you're here, keep us in mind. One of our cool things that we've been offering lately that's been quite popular are inclusion audits, where we'll actually, a digital inclusion audit. So we'll actually go through your website and make sure that it's good for people with low literacy skills and with any disabilities. So that might be something that you might want to put into a work plan in the future, and we'd love to partner with you on that. We also have several research pieces that we do, how to get more Indigenous women involved in technology, how to get more women involved in venture capital, and how social media really affects well-being. And that is something that's close to our heart and definitely a component into this training. We also offer training to different organizations and training specifically for other communications folks. This also includes a free membership. So you can see the QR code is there. Feel free, if you haven't already, to sign up for that free membership. There are all sorts of resources in there, from regulations from different countries and what types of things you should be posting, to different tech tools that can help you achieve some of these goals, to just general information that, just about how we can post and take care of our communication strategies in a way that's respectful to everybody. So let's dive in. This is such an interesting conversation. I have to admit, I was pleasantly and weirdly surprised about how much data there is about this and how prevalent this is, especially since AI has been coming out and creating a lot of content that maybe isn't being fact checked. So there is a little bit of a difference between the different kinds of information. So I do want to kind of get some definitions out there to begin with. So misinformation is false information that's spread. So it's regardless of, the intent to mislead. So it's not most of the often when we talk about misinformation, there's no intention behind it. People are just accidentally sharing it. They think it's true and they put it forward. Disinformation is misinformation that's intentionally spread. And we're going to dive into that a little bit too, and what that means for us as communications professionals. But really, the difference between the two is the idea of intention. And both are often referred to as fake news as well. So if we want to go to the next slide. So there's all sorts of types of misinformation. So let's dive into a few of them just to help you, get an idea of what are some of the ways that this can kind of be out there. So the very first one is the idea of satire or parody. It's not, it's kind of just out to be there to be fun. Like, there's no intention to cause harm, but it does have the potential to fool people. And so, it oftentimes when people are putting together their memes, that sort of thing, they're trying to make it sort of art, they're making it fun and something that's easily shareable. But it also can be used as a channel to spread rumors, conspiracies, accusations, and then kind of get off with it. Like, oh, I was just kidding. It was satire or parody. So that's one of the first ways that this can come across. Another one is the idea of false connections. So this is the idea, like, you see this beautiful title, you're like, I'm very interested in that. And you click through and you get to a link on the other side that has nothing to do with what you click through, or just like a ton of ads, or yuck. And this is basically, yeah, when headlines, visuals, or captions just don't support the content that you actually get to. And this may feel like it's sort of a light thing. It's just mostly annoying. It's an irritation, but on a larger practice, if you look at this, if this is happening regularly, it actually undermines the trust in media and in the internet. And so, it's just something to be thinking about, that it's annoying. It's a yucky form of sending people in the wrong direction, but that's not, it's kind of has long-term consequences, often more than the first initial consequence of it. Another type is called misleading content. So this is using information to kind of frame an issue or an individual. So it'd be like cropping a photo, or, just choosing a key statistic or a key quote that can support an argument. So, someone might say, point A, B, C, D, E is going to get to F, and here's what I'm trying to say. But you only take E and kind of make it sound like, that you're kind of looking, for something, you're trying to make it sound like they're actually saying is something totally different. And so that's one of the ways that you can be looking at misleading content. False content is when genuine content is shared with false contextual information. So like a picture that's sort of reshared, that is supposed to kind of say like, hey, this person was at this event, and, and they were supporting it, but they weren't actually, they were at something else. They just took a picture and sort of put it in there. So it's the idea, like, it's a false information and it's put into a context that doesn't make sense, that's not really real, and it's intended to mislead people. There's good old imposter content. So this is when you have sort of a trust in a certain organization. And, I think about, I used to be on the board of directors for UNICEF Canada. And this was a common thing where other, male actors, people who were not trying to do good things on the internet, would use UNICEF as a way to try to get people's trust. So they would send things out, and this is sort of phishing activity where people are like, "Hey, UNICEF gives us your money," that sort of thing. And they're actually using a recognized brand in order to gain your trust and probably your money. Then there's manipulated content. And so this is when genuine information or imagery is actually manipulated to deceive. So it's actually like things that kind of seem real, but it's actually not what's actually real. And you're kind of like, hey, I even kind of look, I think there's a picture of Julia Roberts, and like, here's what she looks like in this form. She looks way younger. That's just sort of a nice light way, but a lot of times this can be used in political factors that can really kind of get pretty yucky and cause a lot more misinformation to be shared. And then here's the one that's really becoming more and more prevalent in the future as we're going through all of this stuff with the technology developments. But basically, this is fabricated content, and this is actually intended to be false on purpose. It's actually like it's designed to deceive, to do harm, to erode people's trust. And basically, it's really difficult sometimes now. Things are getting more and more close. I've actually noticed X has really started putting disclaimers saying this is fabricated content to Facebook. When you're trying to post there's often like, do you want to do an AI disclaimer? So a lot of groups are trying to, combat this on sort of minimal levels, but fabricated content will be a very serious thing in the future. And again, it's really about trust and what that means for people. So another form that you've probably heard about this is deep fakes. And this is, video, it can be, photos, it can even be people's voices. There's a lot of different ways that this can kind of be put out there. And so being aware of these different types of issues is actually really important, because it's not just like straight up, oh, someone lied or something like that. There's sort of, nuances and various levels of misinformation. Next slide, please. But so there's a couple tools that you should just be aware of. So, we talked about, the social media and memes. Those are often, you really want to check those before you share them. I even, from something that's less nefarious, I remember back in the day, all sorts of quotes going out, and they were always attributed to the wrong people. And, just things like that. That's pretty minor, but I remember getting called on that a few times saying, yeah, this wasn't said by this person. Yes, it's a good quote, but, get it right kind of thing. And so that's kind of a minor version of this, but a lot of the memes that are out there can actually really quite, do some harm. Another thing is forgeries. So again, I mentioned the UNICEF Canada example, but there's all sorts of them like eBay, and you'll actually get, sometimes you can even get documents from these companies. Like it can be really set up quite strong to really make you believe that you are working with. I actually just had an issue with somebody posing as somebody from WestJet. And so I was complaining on Twitter, and they were coming in, they're like, oh, we're from WestJet, we're going to make this better. And essentially they wanted me to send them money. I was just like, yeah, this isn't gonna fly. But, this happens regularly. So, actually people who are setting things up for this nefarious reason. Good old synthetic media or deep fakes. We've already talked about that a little bit. Proxy websites. And this is the idea that when you actually go to the website, it looks quite similar to what you think that organization's website would look like. But the biggest trick here is always to look at the URL. And I'll talk about some tools here too that can help on this particular piece. But the URL is often the indicator. And so, you want to make sure that if you're a legit company, that your URLs are pretty clean, so that also makes it easier for other people to see you as a legit company. Content farms, also known as troll farms. So there are entire areas and groups of people who just gather and put out, misinformation and bad content and content that makes people feel emotionally bad. This exists. It's out there. There's, people with this intention and with these reasons. And sometimes it's not actually people, it's botnets. So it's actually entire bots and entire armies of these bots that different, bad actors might have at their disposal to just go out and really, really spread misinformation. And a new industry has cropped up called disinformation as a service. And this is quite, related to the content farms, but basically this is actually a thing where there's people who are being hired for this service. And, there's a lot of different reasons why people do that, but obviously not ideal. So next slide, please. So, when you think about how misinformation affects users, 42% of Facebook users actually frequently find questionable posts. And, I think it probably depends on some of your algorithms, the types of people and the types of content that you're often following. But I would actually say I thought that was kind of low based on some of the other numbers that I saw. But if you're frequently finding questionable posts, so like that's going to kind of erode your sense of trust, that's for sure. The other interesting fact here is that 96% of people want to limit the spread of false information. So they actually, this is something that's important to a lot of people. So, this is something that the social media companies and the different groups like that should be looking at in order to, this is something that consumers want. They understand the issues with this. And here was also one that I thought was a bit higher than I would have expected, but 90% of Americans will fact check their news. So they'll actually go and take a look at it. So I thought, I was like, okay, good on you. That's a lot of fact checking, but we're going to get into a stat here too that'll help you break that down. So each of these different platforms, these tend to be the platforms that people are seeing untrue content. And again, this is, almost every time they use the platform. So these are high users, and this is a lot of untrue content to be running across. And so these are just, some interesting things. You can see Facebook's right at the top, TikTok's right there, Twitter, and TikTok really gets things going when it's viral too. So they can really contribute to misinformation if things aren't correctly put out there. Twitter too, and now X, Truth Social. These, this is actually from last year, this particular stat, and so I'd be curious to see what this was next year. I just couldn't find one for this year, for 2024, but these are 2023 stats. Okay, and the next one. And then how frequently do you verify before sharing them? So you can see there's a group of people here who are saying almost always. So 50%, is saying almost always are doing it. And then we get the often, about 75% of the time. So this really actually does kind of bump up the numbers that people are actually fact checking. But, so this is good to know that people are aware that this is an issue. But next slide, please. But here's the interesting thing, and this was the part that really kind of blew my mind, is there are actually several studies out there that are saying social media users are 70% more likely to share falsehoods than facts, and of course, accidentally. And so if something's coming out that's like, woo, it can just go through like wildfire because, I don't know if it captures people's attention because it's sort of a unique bit of information, but, this is what we're up against. There's a willingness to share some of these falsehoods. And accidentally too, accidentally. So even though people are fact checking, it still seems to be that a lot of falsehoods are being shared. So what does this mean, from a high level on our effects on society? So we start to get erosion of trust in our key institutions, reduction of trust in corporation. I'm pretty sure all of you can, think and take a look. Like we know that trust is at an all-time low for a lot of our institutions, and there's a lot of polarization in our communities. And misinformation can directly feed that type of activity and those type of mindsets. And one of the key parts of really a good society is having a shared understanding of basic facts. And this is, and having a base where everybody's like, yes, we all agree that this is a thing. Now we're going to figure out what we're going to be doing next to really make this strong, as a stronger society. But right now, we don't really have this shared understanding of basic facts, and that's an issue for society. Another thing too, if we can just go back quick, yeah, is the espionage tactics. This is a real thing, and this is something that has been going on now for several years. But there are several, again, bad actors in society, different countries, who are actually actively creating content in order to erode society and erode trust in government, erode trust in our institutions. And so this is something that we need to be aware of, that, it's very serious and it's actually, coming out on purpose. All right, next slide, please. So, if we're talking about a lot of people here in business, but, the reason that this is really important for, misinformation for organizations is that the effects of negative news is 3 times larger than the effect of positive news on a company. Businesses with one negative article risk losing up to 22% of prospective customers. So that's a quick Google, and there's one negative article, or something out there, someone's done a blog post, something like that, correct or not, that's difficult. And businesses with four or more negative articles or negative news online can experience a loss of up to 70% of prospective customers. So this can actually crush a business if it's misinformation. And here's a couple of just big ones. A lot of the small businesses stories don't necessarily make it out into the news. And so here are some big ones, though, that actually have come out. So Kay Jewelers actually lost 11% of their share value. And basically, it was just a rumor of low value gems that was going through social media, and it directly impacted this business. Pepsi, the shares fell 4% when they said the CEO supported Donald Trump. I don't know where that would sit these days because there's a lot more movement on those types of topics. But 2 years later, and this is obviously something pretty extreme, it lost even more share price with the rumor that it was laced with HIV blood. And that going through social media will affect the way what people are buying, that sort of thing. And Pepsi actually saw a market share fall. And an interesting study that I came across as researching this is that actually, for those who are doing ads and actually putting ads out there, and most often this will come in the form of display ads on Google, that if you put ads alongside the fake news, it can actually, if someone's looking at it, they're like, this news is crap, like this can't be real, and your ad is there, they'll actually start to judge your ad and your company brand as less credible. But if you have a really good name and you're doing your ad there and they're like, well, so and so is advertising on this, it must be credible. It'll actually, if you have a good name and a good brand, it'll actually reflect and make people believe the fake news more likely. And so that can be a pretty intense thing that you really want to be thinking about when it comes to display advertising is, what are you being shown on? What news article, are you there, or what place is it showing? Is it legitimate? Is there a way to verify that? So a lot of people are actually verifying information using tech. And so, if they're using, Google, they'll just actually to go and do a quick Google. Oftentimes, if it's a big misinformation campaign, it'll show up right away on your Google that this is misinformation. You'll get some of the big groups, Snopes, fact check, those kind of things, will actually come up and say, hey, no, this is incorrect. And that's basically what people are doing. The problem with this though too, and then I just like the second one, is read additional articles on the same topic. And it's interesting because there's actually a really great book. I do have it behind me, but I just remembering it now, so I'll bring it out next time. But it's called Trust Me, I'm Lying. And it's a really interesting book about how this fellow had manipulated basically the news and all these different groups by putting out fake news or putting out something that was just slightly sketchy. And then he'd get a real news station to pick it up. And what they were finding is that people weren't fact checking right back to the source. So these misinformation pieces can really come out and keep going, even through our traditional media sources. So this is not a foolproof way of ensuring that the truth is getting out there, but at least it's a little bit better than just having no context. The other, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. And so how can you tell if it's fake news? So this is something actually the government of Canada has a really great website around this. I thought it was really good information that can lay this out. But the biggest thing they talk about, for you as a person, is the emotional red flags that can come up. So if you are suddenly like, whoa, that's interesting. Oh, that can't be, or like angry or like inspired or something out of an idea you've just never heard before, things like that. If you get a super emotional response, that's something that can tell you that things are happening. Another thing too is it makes a bold statement on a controversial issue. We all know that when there's any issue out there, there's all forms of gray. Like there's all sorts of different, it's not all black or white. There's all different ways to approach a solution to, put together things and, to solve things, or, different groups are going to approach it in different formats. But if somebody's just like, here's how it is, and it's just a bold statement, and again, might evoke your emotions, that's also something to be taking a look at. the good old extraordinary claim, I can't help it. I don't know, it must be my marketing background or whatever, but if someone's like, hey, you can win $1 million by doing this easy thing, I'm often the one who's like, oh, interesting. And I know better. But it's one of those things where a lot of these things can really hook us in the humanness and really pull us in. And so, as soon as it gets to the point where you're like, that seems a little too good to be true, believe it from the moment that you have that feeling. And good old clickbait, like you won't believe this video, things like that. That will tend to, because again, they're trying to incite, trying to get as many eyes on that misinformation as possible, especially if it's a bad actor. So, things like that as an individual can really help sort of indicate that there's going to be an issue. And yeah, so there's a few things, and actually this presentation is going much faster than I thought. So there'll be a lot of time for questions afterwards, and a little give you back a few minutes of your day too. But the how to verify information. So here's what they're saying for professionals can be, the most powerful. So first of all, verify the source. Is it somebody that you trust? Do you have a feeling that there was actually a reporter who went and looked at this? Is CBC and CTV both, reporting on the same thing? Who's actually saying this? If you're looking at industry reports, do you trust the organization putting it out? There's a lot of different pieces like that are important, and so taking that time to actually look and verify the source. Again, a couple steps back, make sure that you're also going, to the right source, right? You might be thinking that you're, quoting inc.com, but it's inc.ca or something like that, right? So just take a quick look and, and just make sure that it is a legitimate site and it's the one that want somebody you trust who has done their homework to actually make sure that the news is correct. You can always, of course, use fact checking tools like Snopes or Media Smart's Fact Search. There's actually several out there. Snopes is most often is free for you to get that information, and that's actually commonly looked for. The other thing they say too is that this is one of the easiest ways to correct other people if they've posted misinformation, is just be like, oh, hey, I did a quick look at this. Sorry, Snopes or this particular group says this is untrue. So it's just, it's a way to, be able to kindly tell others that they might have put out the wrong information. And it's not saying like, hey, I'm smarter than you or anything. It's saying, no, this has been fact checked. There's also, if there's an image again that just looks too good to be true, there's always reverse image search. So you can just, go to Tiny Eye, Google Lens. Honestly, if you just Google reverse image search, it actually makes it quite easy to do those checks and be sure, does this make sense? And again, I've been loving it on X that they've been actually having a thing on there that will say, here's what, this is actually AI generated, that's here just for clickbait, and lets you know. And I actually really find that helpful that they have flagged that particular content. And because again, a lot of those things catch my attention too, right? That's what their job is. And so it's nice to know that that's been a fabricated or a deep fake video. And you can also, if you're kind of like, this looks, a fake website, if you're like, this looks okay, but not quite. Like, I don't know, there's something about here, my spidey senses are tingling. There's always, just the good old Google. Okay, well, is this Pepsi? It says Pepsi.ca, but wait, is this actually their website? I'm just gonna do a quick Google, and of course, an ad will most likely show up if they're big enough. But Wikipedia can also help to direct you to the right source. You can look at their Google My Business. This has actually been set up. This is a legitimate group. And then good old Who Is, you can actually go and look and be like, who owns this website? Like, is this real? And it oftentimes can give you a chance to take a look into that deeper. All right. So when it comes to fake social media accounts, the big thing that you want to do is, and this is prolific. I think we've all, seen people within our, Facebook particularly, or someone's like, I've been hacked or I've been duplicated. This is, very common. And also like, like, hey, did I, is this a person I trust to share? Especially if you kind of open up the people that you have within your community online, to people that you don't really know. But the big thing is to always check the profile photo. And oftentimes, people who are, trying to be bad actors, they'll either steal a profile photo from somebody else, or they'll kind of do like just an animal, or, a flower, or a piece of scenery or something like that. So that can be red flags to be like, I don't know, if that, because that person doesn't want to put their face behind what they're saying. Look for recycled images. So again, your reverse image, check, and, are they kind of constantly sharing, every day or every 2 days, sort of just different images just to get them out there that are the same. And, that can be a really, because most people don't, share things, twice or three times in the exact same way. So that's something that can really be something to look at. Typos, a lot of these are created really quickly or through AI or some things like that. So it is getting harder, but that is often a way to be like, I just feel like this person, if it was a real person, would have probably spelled that word right. Like there's just something going on here that's, again, making my spidey senses tingle. You can go to the entire account profile. It's, this is a time, if you've ever thought to do it, to get verified. I have to admit I haven't on several of mine, but I've been, after doing this presentation, I'm going to be going through and verifying several of my social media accounts. Just because it actually shows I've sent in some ID, I'm a real person, I'm creating this. And so verified badge can actually help you. There are some platforms, however, that allow you to purchase a verified badge, which doesn't necessarily mean that, you still have to put some pieces in there to make sure that you're verified and in a legitimate place. But, the verified badge is mostly the idea that you put in some ID. So if if you see that, you can at least know that there's some sort of baseline of truth if they're verified. Look at their engagements. If they're putting out a ton of information and getting, crickets back, and then you kind of look and you're like, wait, it's me and three other people who are friends with this person. Like they're just starting to develop their audience. And so, kind of be thinking, okay, wait a minute, there's just something wrong with, how much this person is posting and how little engagement is happening. And then look at the follower to engagement ratio. Basically, that's just, one next level of what we're talking about. Like if you have 10,000 followers, but, you're getting one like, things like that. Now on X, that's pretty common, but on other things like Facebook and such, it's probably going to be more likely that you're going to have a little bit more engagement if you have more followers. So is that lining up? Does that make sense? And then if someone's just putting out polarized political opinions, and it's just sort of it's already a sketchy sort of social media place, but they're just like, here's all the information you need to know. Here's this bad picture of this one politician. Here's all the reasons, they're eating babies, which is one that we've heard go through the world, is that there's, certain groups in the American politics who've been accused of eating babies as part of an information scandal. So there's if you're seeing a lot of those type of posts, yes, it could be a super passionate person who's just sharing this information accidentally, but most likely it's probably going to be manufactured, and another group who is, feeding them that type of information to be sent out. All right. So when you're thinking about, actually doing this yourself, and again, it's getting more and more difficult, and we're going to see this being more and more difficult for legitimate sources to also be shared, and shared legitimately, because there's just so much content being put out there. And a lot of people sometimes aren't fact checking what's coming through artificial intelligence, through ChatGPT, those types of things. And so accidents will be happening too from verified groups. And but we can do what we can to try to make this a little bit better for people. So the very first thing, we've seen several different ways that people can verify the content before they post it. So that's one big thing. Another thing is actually seeking outside experts if required. I'm lucky. I actually have people that I can text and be like, hey, does this seem real to you? And so probably every one of you has a friend who's like super good at something, or politics, or really good at, understanding what animals are doing, different things, whatever your topic is. You probably have another person that you can just be like, can I just do a quick check with you? Does this make sense? And that can be just the easiest part of it. If you're actually, doing this for your business, you may want to actually seek out an outside expert and understand, what's going on there, and perhaps, creating a counter blog or a counter bit of information from that expert's perspective in order to actually help and put out some real content and truthful content. And the third thing that's really important too, and this is something that almost every article that I read did have this particular, thing in place, is having your communications plan in place and actually having a section in there. What do we do if misinformation is accidentally shared? Nobody's going to mean to do this for the business. This is going to be something that will be accidental. There'll probably be a lot of emotions that are happening about it if it does come out, where people feel ashamed, they feel embarrassed that they let it go by them, and this, potentially could go right up, to all layers of the business. So before it happens, actually put a plan in place and be like, here is what we're going to do. If I want to go to the next slide. So, here's some of the things that you could put in that plan as well. So, one of the best things that has come out is basically own it and actually say, hey, this incorrect post was made, but it was remedied. We've even had to do this. We didn't put out misinformation, but we did have one client that it was a very specific piece of information that was added to their blog, and very specific. So I know, it wasn't just a writer making it up. It was something that had been taken from somewhere else. And about 6 months later, the client came back and said, listen, we've been getting questions about this particular line in this story. Can you show us where the source was? Now, of course, it was 6 months later. We weren't able to find the initial source. So we were kind of like, well, we know it came from somewhere. That's just it'd be too weird for someone to just make that up, to put into this blog post. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that no matter what, people are going to see that, that an issue was seen in this blog post, but it was remedied. And so just a really clean, piece on there. And if it's something too where it's a social media post later saying, earlier this week, we accidentally shared this incorrect information. We're sorry, we've remedied it. Most of the time, that's all that is required. We've taken it down so it can no longer be, continuously shared. Just something like that where you're actually being like, no, this happened. We didn't mean to. Here's what we've done to make it better. And in our case, we just put a little, on that blog post, we put a little line there that just said, hey, the initial information of this blog post said this line, but that source could not be verified. So we have removed it, and everybody was happy with that. And so, it's always better, I think, to be overly transparent about these things than just try to sweep it under the carpet. The other thing you can do too is report the original content to the social media platform. It seems to me that a lot of these social media platforms kind of tend to give more credibility if there's multiple reports that have happened. So taking that time to actually be like, oftentimes on Facebook, it's just like, if you click on the three dots, it'll be like report this post on the post itself and things like that. That's all it needs to happen, is just a quick little, hey, by the way, this is going wild. You should probably be alerted to it. Everybody's sharing it all over the place. I know it's incorrect. Just report it. And hopefully other people are too. And that can be stopped by the social media company themselves. And also, if you're of a large organization or there's a lot of people who are going to be affected, perhaps board members, perhaps, if it's a big mistake, it could be, a share price issue, things like that. Make sure you have a crisis communications plan in place before this type of thing could happen. Again, I know everybody's trying to be careful, but things happen. So just have a plan right in place. It's like, hey, if misinformation is shared, here's what we do. Number one, the head of communications will, do this. Number two, we issue a response. Number three, we let the board know. Number four, if we need to do more and take it to traditional media to let them know what's going on, whatever the case is, depending on the level of things. But when you're in the moment where something bad happens, even if it's a really extreme something, it's always better to just be like, okay, we have a plan for this, because again, this type of a thing, people can get really emotional about it, and you want to just be able to be like, here is the plan. Here's what we're going to be doing going forward to deal with this. So don't forget that particular piece when you're looking at your communications plans and that sort of thing is, there is the opportunity that you'll need crisis communications around this type of thing. So have it laid out and, have a plan in place that everybody agrees upon will be the way that you're going to approach it. All right, so this brings us to the end where we have some questions. I think I might have seen, as I was presenting, a couple things in the chat. So would love to do that. Also, too, if you feel like turning on your camera, you don't have to. If you're just still chilling, eating your sandwich, no problem. But if you'd like to turn on your camera, you're welcome to right now. Also, if you just want to have a quick question, you can either unmute and ask it, or you can pop it in the chat box. But we have a really good one here from Sarah. In regards to social media, how best to address this? I hesitate to engage due to algorithms driving more traffic to the falsehoods. That's a really good point, because if somebody is putting out, and I think we're talking about the social media, and if somebody has like a, misinformation on there, that's a true point. Like if you're like, hey, I actually checked Snopes and this is incorrect, you are adding a comment, which will push it up in the algorithms. But I still think it's important. You can also, if you prefer, you could send it through private message to that person, which might be a way to do that. If you're kind of one of the first ones to the comment, yes, it might drive it up to people, but there's a better chance of other people seeing your comment right away that this was incorrect. So I think those would be kind of the few things you want to do, because you're right. Like you don't want to be like, oh, hey, I'm engaging with this, I'm liking with it, I'm checking it, I'm going through and clicking through, which will pump it up on the algorithms. But I think ultimately it's really about the idea of you need to let that person know so that they can sort of stop and make some different decisions. But you also need to think about those particular pieces. So really good point, Sarah. But for me, if it looks like that's a concern that you're just going to add more fuel to the fire and have more people eyeballs on it, send them a direct message instead. That might also be just a softer way of saying, hey, because nobody likes to be told they're wrong. No one wants to be embarrassed with this type of thing. And, a nice little direct message might solve that in both ways. All right. Yeah. So the misinformation, and there's another question that's come in. Can you clarify the difference between misinformation and disinformation? So Vita, could you actually take us back to that first slide there? But the big difference is really intention. And so I think it's the second slide or something in there. But it's one of those ones that and there's other people who will say like malformation and different things like that. So there's a lot of different terms around this when we're looking, but really disinformation is people who are actively trying to make bad news spread or incorrect news spread. And again, that can be bad actors from other countries. It can be somebody who's just like, I care about this political party so much, I'm going to actually create my own content and put it out, even though it's wrong. But people who are actually like actively thinking, I want to spread this information. Whereas misinformation, it's not really about the intention. It's kind of more, this is just accidental. Somebody just was like, hey, I looked at this, thought it was cool, shared it, and just perpetuated the cycle, versus those who are actually trying to make these bad things happen. And unfortunately, there's a lot of different groups and individuals out there who have vested interests in doing this and sharing this information. So that's where it becomes disinformation. But great question. Are there other questions out there? Yeah, for me, the thing that, again, that just blew my mind was how quickly a lot of this information can spread. And, as humans, and I think it's something too, when you're talking about the emotional piece, um, you kind of get excited. You're like, oh, here's a bit of information I didn't know before, or something. And I remember I did this once when I was very first on social media. And hopefully it won't happen again, but it could. But the big thing is that there was actually some crickets who sounded like they were playing the violins, and someone's like, if you speed up crickets, it actually turns into a symphony. And I honestly, I just wanted to believe it. It sounded so amazing and beautiful. So I shared it, and immediately someone's like, sorry, they sent me Snopes. And I was like, damn, like I should have known better. And I was embarrassed because I should know better, and I got taken in, but I just, I wanted to believe it. And so a lot of misinformation isn't, done maliciously. It's just because people like the content and they're like, oh, wouldn't this be cool? Not realizing that it's not true. Great question here is what happens if misinformation is accepted in a workplace because it suits the culture of the sector? How can we combat this? Whew, tough one, Tom, because that's a really big question. And, I think there's a little bit of finesse that would be required here, and probably even a little bit of strategy that it's important to put in place. You want to think about this a little bit because again, you don't want to alienate yourself in the culture, but and oftentimes too, if there's a whole group of people who believe really strongly in a certain something, and then one or two people come along and say, hey, that doesn't work, it kind of makes the group almost kind of be like, you're not just insulting me and what I think, you're insulting all my people and all of us, right? And so it can really actually, if you're not careful about it, it can actually even polarize people even a little bit more. So the biggest thing I would look at, depending what the misinformation is, that sort of thing, is kind of looking at it from what I would probably do is be like, listen, we've all been talking about this particular topic a lot. Could we actually get an expert in to tell us what the reality is, just so we're basing our decisions on facts rather than what we all think or want to believe. And again, you say it in a nice way, still sound like you're coming at it from the idea and the agenda of the group. But that might be a way of doing it, or, slowly introducing contrary opinions into, like, if you have Slack or Teams or something, just be like, hey, this is an interesting, article, like what do people think about this? And you might get a bunch of people who are like, no, we believe over here, and those types of comments, and be like, okay, but if we kind of move to the core of this argument, it's this bit of information, does that seem correct, and things like that, and just sort of, without putting people on the spot, without making them feel foolish for their beliefs, trying to introduce a new idea very gently. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to really pull in outside sources. So it's not kind of your opinion versus someone else's opinion. So those would be sort of my high level thoughts on that, not really knowing the circumstance, but it's really, it's a really specialized communication steps that you want to be taking to slowly introduce people to the new idea, so that they're, not as emotional when they encounter it, or resistance to the idea. Hopefully, did that answer your question, Tom? Okay, I got a thumbs up. All right. Great. Is there anybody else out there who wants to chat about this, or share a comment? Okay. Well, I love being able to give people time back in their day. I always think that that's an awesome gift that I can give for people. So you have 10 minutes back into your day. So enjoy the rest of your day. I hope this gives you some food for thought. I'd also love to hear if you have any thoughts about this or want to share it on social media. Just any of the things that you learned. For me, even though I know this area and I was interested, again, I just found it really fascinating, the prevalence of the problem and how big it is and what impacts it has on people. And so we really need to be working together as communications professionals to do what we can, to make sure we don't ruin the internet. This is why we can't have nice things, right? So let's do what we can to make sure it's as clean as possible. So thank you, everybody. And again, please feel free to drop me a note if you have any further thoughts about this after the call's done.